Welcome to the Creative Soul Healing Podcast. Here we talk about the connection between creativity and healing, and how we are creative and how creativity helps us heal mentally, physically, and emotionally. Join us now. Hi everyone, Larissa Rusell of Creative View Healing, and today I have with me Jennifer Moore. Jennifer Moore is author of Amazon bestseller Empathic Mastery, founder and headmistress of Empathic Mastery Academy, and host of the Empathic Mastery Show podcast. She's a master trainer for EFT International and a mentor and healer for other highly sensitive empaths. Intuitive from the get-go, Jennifer experienced her first prophetic dream when she was 9, and she's been navigating her extrasensory awareness ever since, supporting intuitives, light workers, and creatives to use their abilities for good is Jen's greatest passion. Learn more at empathicmastery.com. Wow. You know, there are days when things go all like the way they're supposed to and the way they're not. But anyways, welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you so much, Larissa. I really appreciate it. And yes, there are days where things go exactly the way you want them to. And then other days where it's like, it's all sideways, which could be an entire podcast just about the creative process when things go sideways. And
absolutely,
you know, happy accidents.
Yeah, there's been so many times, and that's the case. In fact, somebody said that in a class this morning, and they were like, "Oh, happy accidents." I'm like, "Yes, let's make birds out of it." Thinking of Bob Ross, but it's so true. There's times when we completely shift.
Yeah.
You know what we're doing, saying whatever it is, because you know that's just the way it's going now.
Well, and personally, one of the things I have found is that a lot of times when things are going smoothly, you don't necessarily notice what needs to be adjusted or shifted. And a lot of times when something is difficult or challenging or something comes up, that's when I get the clue that I need to reconfigure something, or that I need to redefine something, or that I need to learn how to express something a lot more clearly. And when stuff just goes smoothly, you know, we can just keep on chugging along. And a lot of times there are improvements that would be beneficial that I'm not even going to notice until something goes sort of sideways. So
true.
Yeah. I mean, happy accidents often, it's like in hindsight, it's like, oh, if that hadn't happened, then I wouldn't know this, and this.
It's like literally my whole life.
Yeah.
We'll just call it happy accidents.
Yeah. Sorry, the name of my bio. Or the name of your autobiography. Happy accidents.
That's actually not a bad idea.
Yeah.
So can you share us a little bit of your story and the path that's brought you to where you are now? Past this bio that I, tried so hard.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Jennifer Elizabeth Moore. And as you mentioned, I'm the author of the book Empathic Mastery, which the subtitle is a 5-step system to go from emotional hot mess to thriving success. And I also just published the journal, the Empathic Mastery Diary, to go with it, which is also a standalone. And it's a 52-week journal with all kinds of prompts and cool stuff and affirmations and illustrations and just really, really fun stuff to track your process. And so I started as a visual artist from the time I was a really, really little kid, but with a lot of imagination, a lot of curiosity, a lot of sense of wonder, and a desire to be connected to magic. And so I processed the world through making art. I processed the world through, sort of the relationship to pen and paper and crayons and all of that. But at the same time, I also was processing the world through looking for and seeking the extrasensory perceptions and just kind of like the magic in the world. And I was a very sensitive kid. I was also an outlier. I was different than a lot of the other children. And, the thing about kids is they recognize the ones that are not their own kind. And children are cruel. They can be really harsh around children who are different. And where adults some adults know how to be civil. Children, on the other hand, really are like, you're not like us. And so, I really identified with Rudolph in that, I was either the last one picked on the team or just not allowed to play the reindeer games. And so I also not only was just really different, creative, I was actually raised by atheists. So I was raised in a very um, sort of conservative, very white, very upper middle class, proper New England town where the sidewalks got rolled up every Saturday evening. There were no bars, no alcohol. We had blue laws. And, it's like we had more banks and churches than anything else. And so I grew up in that kind of an environment as an outsider, but I also was really sensitive to the emotions, the thoughts, the feelings, the sensations that were going on around me. And so I was constantly being told that I was too sensitive, that I was overreacting, that I was taking things too personally, that I had an overactive imagination to just suck it up and get over it. And so I started to interpret this as that there was something wrong with me. And my way of dealing with that as a little kid and even as a young adult was through food, and particularly through turning to sugar, because in the short term it made me feel much better. In the long term it made me feel a lot worse. And so sort of the combination of being an artist was one of the places where I got to be myself. And because I had talent and I had the ability to do artwork, visual art well, it was one of the places in my life where I got validation, I got strokes, I got acknowledgement for my talents and my skills. And so it was a natural place for me to go. Um, and as I got older, basically, I, all of my coping mechanisms, particularly things like the food and the getting into relationships that were not serving me, that kind of stuff really started not working to the point where I needed more support and help. And so I started on a healing journey for myself. And eventually that led me beyond just being an artist to the point where I really wanted to support and help other people and share uh, the miracle of healing with other people, because I know what it's like to struggle. And I also know what it's like to feel relief. And I wanted to help other people with that. So I could go on and on about the story, but that's kind of like, I don't know, that's kind of the short, sweet version, kind of the HBO first look of Jennifer Moore's life.
I love it. I
Yeah.
love it. And it's so true that, similar to you, what I had gone through and all of those things led me to want to share that,
Yeah.
with,
Yeah.
with my, the people who follow me as well, because it's like, you know what works, and you just like, here, let me help you, because I want you to feel better too. It's
Yeah.
so true.
Well, and if you've been struggling for a long period of time, and a lot of the things that ordinary solutions that, kind of the average muggle that works for them don't work for you or don't work for me, like I have tried so many things. And especially when I was younger, I tried so many things. And I just found that a lot of the things that kind of the average person could do and find a way to rally didn't cut it for me. And so having the experience of finding tools that work really, like, I don't know, like I felt I don't take those tools for granted. And when I find something that is effective and is helpful, it's just so precious to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's exactly it. That's exactly it.
Yeah.
And I know you've touched on this a little bit, but what would you say healing with creativity means to you?
The first word or the first thought answer that comes to me is the capacity to heal with curiosity, to approach everything with an open mind and with the ability to see things in a new way every single time. That I think creativity, like the line between creativity and like innovation, inventiveness, discovery, is all interconnected. And instead of following a formula and instead of trying to make everything do like, point A to point B, follow these steps, follow these directions, for me, healing with creativity is both. It's like, it's kind of one of those words, it's one of those sentences where it means this if you say it this way and this if you say it that way, because there's healing with creativity as the modality, but then there's also healing with creativity as the adjective, that we are using creativity or we're healing with creativity. And I think that for me, there's the experience of using creative expression as the modality, as the expression, whether it's movement or writing or music or drawing or creating in some way or collaging. There's that. But then there's also that aspect of healing with creativity in the sense of all not making assumptions, not coming to it with like a formula that has to be followed. Because in my experience, the most exciting creative like healing process is when there's this inspiration and like at each moment you're sort of listening and thinking about what fits, what works out, what are you going to pull out of the toolbox that's going to work in this situation? What's the question that you want to draw out and that you want to get more information about? Like, how do you want to approach it? So I guess just thinking about that, for me, it is both a noun, the modality of creativity, and also the adjective of the process of or expressing or healing creatively.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's a really good point that you make, right? Because we often think of it as like the modality, and it's so much deeper than that, right?
Yeah.
And looking and exploring new ways to heal and how that works for us. And it's going to be different for everyone. And one process may not work and one modality may not, so just that exploration, I think, is super important. Yeah.
Well, and it's so much, I think that being an artist is not about the product. Being a creative person is not necessarily, I mean, yes, you've got a bunch of paintings behind you. I've got a bunch of paintings behind me. There's sort of like, it's almost like there's kind of the byproduct of creativity is all of this wonderful stuff that you put up on the wall or that you put, that you listen to or you watch on on a big screen or a small screen. But I think that for me, creativity is more about the way I look at life and the way I perceive my world and I engage with my world than it is necessarily about the product. Because I've gone through a number of iterations in my life with my creative process where the modality that I thought I was married to changed for me, and where I have had to have the willingness to shift gears and recognize that even though I might not be painting right now, or I might not be writing right now, or I might not be drawing right now, or I might not be moving my body or singing or doing something right now, like whatever modality it is that I identify as being, I'm a painter, I'm a sculptor, I'm a this, that even if I'm not doing that, I'm still living my life from this experience of creative process. Like everything is a creative process. And giving myself, like as a kid and as a young art student and sort of young adult, even, I had a lot of more rigid rules about what it meant to be a creative person, which included this idea of production or productivity, or like, what do you have to show for the creativity? Whereas at this point in time, I've gone through enough phases in my life where the creative outlet changed. And there are times where the creative outlet is cooking. There are times where the creative outlet is writing. There are times where the creative outlet is digital, digital, like spending hours in Canva creating memes and digital content. But it all comes back to, there are times where the creative process is creating ritual and creating experiences for other people and teaching. And so I have found that the ability to, or the willingness to reboot my perspective and give myself permission to approach life as a creative process, as opposed to defining it by a paintbrush or a pen or a computer screen.
Mm-hmm. And it's so true. I often talk about that, creativity is in everything we do.
Everything.
Right? And so many times we think about, painting a masterpiece or writing a best-selling book or playing in a rock band, whatever it is. And creativity, because it's in everything we do, it's like, how can we look at that creativity or appreciate that creativity to enhance our life, as opposed to, it being a chore, right?
Being a chore. And also, I hear when you were talking about like create a masterpiece, being a rock star, being the New York Times bestseller, this idea of the end goal is, I think it's incredibly sad how creativity in many ways has gone from being something that's the birthright of everybody to being very, to having sort of these elite contain, ideas of who's allowed to be creative. And, so often when we're focused on it has to be a masterpiece, it has to be a New York Times bestseller, I have to be a rock star. What I've seen, unfortunately, is that set of rules and that perfectionism is just a total buzzkill. Like it is, because it inhibits our ability to create. And one of the very best creative suggestions that I ever received when I was much, much younger was, I had this friend who, we were like art buddies, and we sort of like supported each other in being creative and being artists. And we held each other accountable. Like we would talk on the phone almost every day and just sort of be like, so what are you doing for creativity today? And one of the things that this person said was has left such an incredibly lasting impression was she gave me the assignment to create the very worst piece of art I could possibly make. And that is the most fun assignment. Like whether it is make the worst piece of music you could ever possibly make the schlockiest, write the schlockiest poem you could ever write, paint the sappiest painting, the worst, most mediocre, most awful thing you could ever do. And what's really funny about that is when you set that as your assignment, not only is it incredibly fun, but also you'll start to discover that you can't make something bad. Like it's next to impossible. Whereas if you set the sight of, I'm going to create a masterpiece, you're probably actually going to create something pretty, the worst piece ever. So, but when you set that as sort of like hey, what if I just give myself permission to make the worst thing I could possibly make? Mm-hmm. Freedom comes from that.
Yeah, it really does. And just in, as you were saying that, I was thinking about that expectations, right? And the expectations on us, and which then got me thinking about, why so many people think they're not creative is because of the school system, and we're grading art. And it's like, okay, technique is one thing, like to learn a technique, but to tell me I can't paint a purple tree because they don't exist and I have one in my yard. But even if I didn't, a purple tree, that works for me.
Right.
And, grading that sort of thing. And then people are afraid to be creative in whatever way. And even I think about home ec, which was a thing I had to take way back in the day.
I did too.
I don't think they have that, and we couldn't vary from the recipe. We couldn't add a little of this or a little of that. We had to follow the recipe. And it's like, we killed creativity, and now we're struggling because it's like, oh, we don't have any in our, and now, employers want people that are more creative, and it's like, well, how do we bring that back? We have to get people to think again.
Right, right, right. Well, and as you were speaking about home ec, I was thinking it's kind of an interesting, dynamic, because in my experience with home ec, part of the reason why you couldn't vary from the recipe was because there was a very, very there was a set of allotted supplies and staples, and there wasn't extra vanilla extract. There wasn't extra spices. There wasn't really any, like, you couldn't vary from the recipe, partially because it was kind of like they gave you a kit and you had only so much stuff to work with. And, I mean, it's funny though, because like as a kid, I grew up at the time where they still had all of those paint by numbers paintings and stuff like that. And I knew people who really loved to paint by numbers. I loathed it. I hated painting by numbers. And, I think one or two times people gave me something with a paint by numbers and I would try it. And then I would just kind of like go wildly off road. And, it's funny because it's like coloring outside of the lines, but with a coloring book, or trying to paint by numbers, but outside the painting by numbers. That I think is really like, it's much easier to look at it and be like, you are doing this wrong, than when you have a little bit of structure that you can then, but that where there's room to play or grow or stretch.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Yeah. And I agree so much with that. And I've never been one of those facilitators, teachers that was like, okay, we're going to do this, and you put this paint here, and then you do this. And it's like, okay, here's the supplies that we have. Here's like the general idea. How does this feel to you?
Exactly.
So I am not the person to come to if you want to know an exact way to replicate something. That's not, but yeah, I think it's so important that we have that space.
Right? Absolutely. Well, and what I realized, for me, one of the things that I have found over the years, and this has been particularly true with writing, like I can start with a blank piece of paper for a piece of visual art. But when it comes to writing or getting thoughts or ideas down, I have discovered that I do way better responding to things, responding to prompts, responding to questions, responding to, as we were talking about, like that idea of discovering that something needs course correction or needs adapting. When I discover that there's a problem and we're looking for a solution, I'm much more able to access my creativity and access that sort of experience, and then kind of engage with it and find next thing, than if I'm just sort of trying to create something out of whole cloth. And so I know for myself, like having access to templates can really make a huge difference. Being able to take, like, even one of the things about my writing process is I come from a family with a lot of dyslexia and a lot of ADHD. I definitely consider myself neurospicy. And so what I've found is that for example, for the writing process, I generally have to speak things before I can write things. And when I gave myself permission to take pieces of, record things, rip them as transcripts, and then take that content and often toss it over to one of my editing friends, and let the editor take a whack at it and just clean it up a little bit and then throw it back at me. And then I get to go back in and write and play and engage with it. Mm-hmm. I find that process is so much more accessible than just sort of starting with a blank piece of paper and going, okay, so now what? And the other thing is, like, even with for emails and things like that, starting with sort of like templates where it's like, your favorite version of greeting, term, name for the person, situation you're in, like, even if it's just they're saying like, use this formula and plug and play. I find that to be much easier. And yet that is so different than sort of the, following along with Bob Ross, or going to one of those like wine and painting evenings where
Mhm.
everybody comes away with the same painting of the moon and the tree.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's so true. And because we've been taught that, first of all, not to trust ourselves, but also that creativity has got to be a certain way, templates are wonderful for that, because it
Yeah.
allows you to explore with a little bit of um, prompting without doing it all for you. Yeah,
Right.
I absolutely agree with that. I
Right.
use them myself. That's more the way that I would instruct. And yeah, I love that. I love that.
Well, and I mean, right now within the creativity world, there is a lot of hubbub and a lot of stuff going on around AI, like,
Mhm.
I mean, it's just amazing. And my personal feeling about it is that instead of looking at it as competition, what if we looked at it in terms of collaboration? And instead of looking at it as this is going to replace me, what if we look at it as this is a tool I can use to expedite the process, to save myself some time, and to adapt things? But, because I've heard a lot of artists who are just up in arms with this idea that AI is going to replace humans. And I'm kind of like, until AI actually can represent or render hands effectively, I don't think we have anything to worry about for a while. And there's also just something, I don't know, like just a little bit sort of lacking in the AI at this point in time. But this, like with like chats GPT, I think it is, the AI, the chat AI that's just like taking the world by storm right now, and also all of the visual art AI. I actually personally find it, if you look at it as a tool that you can collaborate with, that can help you and might give you ideas or prompts or thoughts, and then you can take it and go, oh, I could do this with this thing. And even before that, I went through a period where I was still doing a lot of visual art and painting, and I would go and I would take drawings that I had done, and I would have them printed digitally, like on a canvas by like Canva, or like not Canva, I mean Zazzle or some other place like that.
Mhm.
And then I would go back into the printed canvas that was my original illustration, so my own work. But then I'd go back in and I would take paint to the printed canvas, and I would go and rework the whole thing and play with it and create a new iteration of art from that. And so I love the idea of, what, like how do we play with something so that it's not just derivative, but it really is a whole new iteration and a whole new way of playing with it. And I don't know, like as I'm talking, what's coming to my mind and I'm thinking about is just how much play is such an incredibly important part of the creative process, and giving ourselves permission to be playful, to break the rules, to not have it to be, it doesn't have to be perfect.
Yeah, and I think it's like the perfect, wrap up right there, is like give ourselves permission to play. Doesn't have to be perfect, and just get out there and do, experience, try. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. And any final words before we go today? It's just been wonderful to talk to you.
Oh, Larissa, it has been so delightful to talk about creativity. I mean, I think once a creative person, always a creative person. And I guess I want to go back to the piece of, well, two things. One is that in my experience, there's often a crossover between creativity and empathy, or being an empath. And I didn't discuss this before, but we talked a little bit about the word empath and empathic. And I'll just say that very short, very, very short definition: an empath is a person who picks up the thoughts, feelings, energy, and sensations from the world around them and filters that experience as if it's their own. And what I have noticed is that because artists and empaths are often intersected, that one of the things that as artists we need to be aware of is the impact of other people's thoughts, feelings, and energy on our own creative process and our own expectations of what we think we should or should not be doing. And a lot of times, it's not necessarily even our limitations that we're coming up against, it's the world's limitations. And coming back to that permission, I give myself permission to release that which is not mine. I give myself permission to, identify as an artist, to identify as a creative, and to let myself play. And that it is okay for creativity to be simply because it improves, it like makes life so much sweeter, so much more wonderful, so much more delightful. And to break away from patriarchy and capitalism and empire, where everything is about the bottom line. And instead, like, what if creativity gets to be a radical part of the healing path that we as a species are taking to reclaim our sovereignty, to reclaim our connection to the earth, and to live in a way that is sustainable and is nourishing, as opposed to like non-sustainable and all about the productivity. So, like, I give myself permission to just simply be and to make and to be a maker. And I invite everybody who's listening to really claim that right to play, to make, to be, and to let go of the other people's egos, other people's expectations, other people's ideas of what it means to be creative, and just let it be okay. So those are my final words.
I love that. I absolutely love that. And I see that you have a free gift, the Empathic Safety Guide, 3 Basics for Finding Calm in the Eye of the Storm. So we'll make sure that link is there.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yes.
Yeah.
And again, thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, Larissa, it has really been a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
To our listeners, we will see you again next time. And in the meantime, I wish for you amazingly creative days. Thank you for listening. If you found our podcast of interest, we'd love for you to leave a review wherever you listen in.